Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Liz Mumper. I am a pediatrician and a senior fellow with the Independent Medical Alliance. Welcome to tonight's show, which is live. And if you are catching the replay, we're happy to have you here too. A quick and exciting note tonight we are streaming to YouTube after years of being banned on that platform. So we're hopeful that they will honor this discussion and allow it to remain available for everyone to see. Tonight's conversation addresses one of the most urgent questions in medicine today. Has the CDC's 72-dose childhood vaccine schedule ever truly been tested for safety? We'll be joined by two physicians who challenged this framework, Dr. Paul Thomas and Dr. Ken Stoller, as well as attorney Rick Jaffe. Together, they're bringing a landmark lawsuit against the CDC. But before we dive into this discussion, we want to start with a short clip from Secretary Robert F. Kennedy at Hillsdale College. In this talk, he describes how he and attorney Aaron Siri sued Dr. Anthony Fauci. Let's listen, and then we'll ask tonight's guests for their perspective.
For many years, I was saying not one of the 72 vaccines mandated for children has ever been safety tested in pre-licensing placebo-controlled trials, not one. Tony Fauci was saying he's lying. In 2016, President Trump appointed me to run a vaccine safety commission, and he ordered Fauci and Collins to meet with me with White House counsel present. And I said to Fauci at that meeting, you say I'm lying. For 8 years, you've been saying I'm lying about this. Show me this study. And he said, I don't have it here. It's back in Bethesda. And I'll send it to you. I never got it. So I sued him. Me and Aaron Siri, and after stonewalling us for a year, their lawyers met us on the courthouse steps and said, yep, you're right. We never had any study. And they gave it to us in writing. You can go to the CHD website, my website, and you can see that letter from HHS. There's no downstream liability. There's no front-end safety testing. That saves them $250 million. And there's no marketing and advertising costs because the federal government is ordering them ordering 78 million school kids to take that vaccine every year. What better product could you have? And so there was a gold rush to add all these new vaccines to the schedule that we don't need. Most of these vaccines are unnecessary. Many of them are for diseases that are not even casually contagious. It was a gold rush because if you get onto that schedule, the recommended schedule, it's $1 billion a year for your company. And in many cases, NIH is bearing the royalties. So we got all of these new vaccines, 72 shots, 16 vaccines, and now even more because we're doing the HPV vaccine. And that year, 1989, we saw an explosion in chronic disease in American children. The neurological diseases suddenly exploded in 1989. ADD, ADHD, sleep disorders, language delays, ASD, autism, Tourette syndrome, tics, narcolepsy. These are all things that I never heard of. Autism went from 1 in 10,000 in my generation, according to the CDC data, to 1 in every 34 kids today.
So, way to go, Bobby. I am going to introduce our guests today and then ask for any comments they have about this speech. First, we are honored to have Rick Jaffe, who's a nationally recognized healthcare attorney who has fought landmark cases on things like medical freedom, experimental treatments, and physician-free speech. A Columbia Law School graduate, he's led major lawsuits against COVID misinformation laws and continues to challenge medical board overreach. He's also the author of Galileo's Lawyer, and he writes at rickjaffe.com. Rick, do you have a comment about Secretary Kennedy's speech?
Well, yeah, I agree with it. And I think that to some extent, it's the basis of this most recent lawsuit involving the two doctors, uh, uh, um, Paul, Paul and Ken. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's right on the money. And the basic point of the lawsuit is that um, they've never tested the combined effect of the vaccine schedule, not the when it was 25, not when it was 50, not the 72 antigens. They just never tested it. And I think most of the people listening to this know that. But the other thing that maybe some people don't know is that the government's own outside advisory agency, the Institute of Medicine, twice in the last 25 years told them they ought to test it, even if it was going to be just observational studies, which are the kind that were done by Paul and Jack Weiler. So I think that, and so the nub of it is, we filed this lawsuit, Thomas versus Minaris, and Paul, Ken Stoller is a plaintiff, as long also one organization, challenging the fact that they've never tested the combined effect of the vaccines. They've been told to, and something that a lot of people, including Ken Stoller, has talked about is something about the precautionary principle, which is that basically they're asking the wrong question. The question is not whether the combined schedule has been proven to be unsafe. The question is whether it's been proven to be safe, and it has to be presumed unsafe until proven otherwise. And that's what happens in all basically regulatory affairs involving science, except for vaccines. That has special status. When you do chemotherapy, combined chemotherapy, you can't just give 10 doses to people. I mean, at least not in orthodox medicine, you can't. I mean, you've got to test it out in clinical trials. And in EPA, when you have all these toxins together, you have to see what the combined effect is. But because vaccines are in some special category for some reason, no one really thought that you had to test them all together. We're saying that's wrong, and we're saying that's a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, and that is, in effect, the essence of our case. And it really was foreshadowed by a lot of what Robert F. Kennedy had been talking about when he headed CHD, and continues to talk about now that he's Secretary of HHS.
Thank you, Rick. Next, I have with me Dr. Paul Thomas, who is a retired pediatrician, author of the best-selling Vaccine Friendly Plan. He now educates patients through his show, With the Wind, Science Revealed. He writes on Substack, and he has a Kids First Forever coaching platform where he shares guidance on pregnancy, child health, and informed vaccine choices. Paul, do you have comments that go beyond what Rick has shared?
Sure. First, I want to thank Rick for reaching out and saying, hey, we've got an issue here. Are you willing to participate? And I said, hell yeah.
Brave guy. You have to be very brave to go against the government these days. And
so, my experience, Liz, I mean, I was trained by you 25 years ago to wake up to what was going on with what I was actually seeing, but I didn't understand, right? So over my career, which spanned 35 years, I started seeing kids getting sicker and sicker, more and more chronic disease. And as both the film and Rick have mentioned, this is different. This is an explosion. I tried to publish a study like yours that compared my partially vaccinated and fully vaccinated kids to my unvaccinated kids. You had actually successfully published such a study. I was not able to get it published. And I even went to the journal that you used, and they just would have nothing to do with it. So as I went through my practice, I'm seeing kids get sicker and sicker. I wrote the Vaccine Friendly Plan. The CDC the Oregon Medical Board came after me and said, prove that that's as safe as the CDC schedule, which the whole point of this lawsuit is the CDC schedule has never been tested, ever. So it's what a joke that they would want me to prove that my proposed plan, if you will, alternative schedule was as safe as something that's never been proven to be safe and that clearly is dangerous. Anyway, I did it. I published the Vax-Unvax data, and within days, my license was yanked. They had an emergency meeting, and I got a call from my attorney. Paul, you can't go to the office. You can't see patients. You can't write prescriptions. You have been suspended after an emergency meeting, you are a threat to public health. So that was the response of the medical board. And it's now time to get things right. I mean, vaccines, as Rick pointed out already, and I know Ken's going to do the same, we have to assume that they're not safe because they've never been tested, the precautionary principle. Informed consent has been the basis of medicine since, first do no harm, beginning of time. And with vaccines, somehow we've just abandoned that and you just do them because the CDC said so. Vaccine mandates abolish, eliminate, obliterate informed consent. And that's the problem. So this lawsuit is an attempt to say, hey, since you don't have safety testing, they cannot be mandated. These need to move, and Rick could speak more to this, but these need to move to Schedule B where parents have the choice of whether or not they want to take these vaccines.
Thank you, Paul. Next, I'd like to call on Dr. Ken Stoller, who has 30 years of experience as a physician in integrative and environmental medicine. He's focused on neurologic conditions, chronic illness, vaccine safety. He's a strong advocate for individualized care and medical freedom. He's also an author, and we'll look at his book at the end of the show. He actually has several. Ken, do you want to add to what your other colleagues have said about Bobby Kennedy's statements?
The part I want to add is a lot of states have these language in their rules for physicians, such as a physician determines that the vaccines are not safe for, whoever the patient is. And in California, I originally approached the medical board when this new law was passed there because I wanted clarification on language. How does a physician determine whether a vaccine is safe when they've never done safety studies? And I wanted to get the medical board's opinion on this because the language of the law that got me into trouble was so vague. So I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of this like group think mindset in this religion I call jabism, where everything is safe and effective and nothing else will interfere with that mantra.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to come back to you now, Rick, and I think you've alluded to some of this, but can you explain precisely what the lawsuit's about and why you think the CDC has broken the law, and maybe allude to the issue about the requirement for reports to Congress about vaccine safety initiatives and whether or not that has happened in the last few decades?
So those are separate issues and separate lawsuits. In terms of the reporting requirements from HHS to Congress that was supposed to happen as a result of the Vaccine Act in '86, that had never happened. And a colleague of mine and good friend, Ray Flores, had this simple but brilliant idea to sue RFK Jr. because he, like every HHS secretary going back 25 years, never made a single report to Congress. They originally had a meeting and then they just did nothing. So he ended up suing HHS to force them to reinstate the committee headed by the NIH director, to force them to produce a report within 2 years. And then that suit was settled. And interestingly, that suit was settled basically the day we filed the Thomas versus Menares case. So that's a separate issue. That has to do with reporting to Congress. Our lawsuit seeks to move all childhood vaccines from what it now is, which is recommended status, to, and that's category A, to category B, which is shared decision making. And there are a couple of vaccines, maybe even for kids, that are shared decision making because of the fact that they're so rare or the condition is so rare. But basically, all vaccines for childhood now are fully recommended. So our point is that because these vaccines have never been tested in combination, you can't presume safety, and therefore they have to be moved into shared decision making. And the reason for that is the federal government is governed by the Administrative Procedure Act, and this is a little technical. And you can challenge government action if it's arbitrary and capricious. And one of the definitions of, or one of the ways you can show a rule is arbitrary and capricious is if the agency failed to consider an important factor in a decision. So we kind of have a simple point. It's an important factor to know whether you give 72 medical interventions over 18 years and whether it's safer than not administering them. I mean, whether the combined schedule is safer or causes more harm than good. It's never been studied. The CDC has to admit that it's never been studied because the Institute of Medicine has been telling to do these studies for 25 years. The CDC's answer is, well, it's unethical. Everyone knows vaccines work. So you can't not give people, kids vaccines, but, then you have observational studies. I mean, based on the fact that, like Kennedy says recently, I mean, take a look at the Amish. They don't get any vaccines and they're a lot healthier. They don't have autism. So you have all these indicia, and we point about this in the lawsuit. You have all these indicia. If you take a look at the sudden SID data from early on, there's all these indications. I mean, if you take a look at the graphs on the increase of autism and all kinds of immunological diseases, you see a tremendous uptick associated with the time when the vaccine schedule, as Kennedy pointed out, went from a few to a lot. So in our view, this is important information which the CDC has just swept under the rug because that and ACIP has been basically doing, they're like the front people for pharma. So that's really the lawsuit. I do want to, I'll break a little news here, which is that based on some of the things that Kennedy has said recently, I don't know if people have caught this, but I was very moved when Kennedy said a few days ago that for too long, the government has simply ignored the opinions and beliefs and the concerns of mothers, 30 to 70% of whom think that their kids' autism was caused by the vaccines. So what I decided, and then what happened is someone republished the post, and what I saw on X was all kinds of people wanted to join in the case, like a class action. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to amend the complaint next month, and we're going to put before the federal court and the defendant, the CDC, stories of families who have seen this happen to their kids in autism and other diseases, and really it's following through Kennedy's acknowledgement that the government hasn't been listening. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to try to do what I think Kennedy wants to do, which is I think he wants to have an office that's going to cull through all this data, all these stories, not just numbers and not just charts, but people's stories. And we're going to ask that there be an office where these get investigated, because I think what they're going to find, there are hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of families where you see the same thing. A kid goes in for a vaccine, and then 3 hours later, a day later, the kid is gone. He's just gone. I mean, I've heard stories like this at CHD conferences, and that happens not 1 or 100 or 1,000, that's 10,000. And you can talk all day about the Jabberwocky science and all that, and association and causation, but at some point, the government has to listen and act as a result of however many thousands or 10,000 stories we can put together, and have a government investigators look into these stories. And I think that would help in convincing ACIP that they need to change the recommendation if a judge, assuming a judge wouldn't do it anyway. So at the CHD conference next month, I'll be circulating and talking to people about who wants to, join in the case in some capacity. But it's really about empowering people, not just having people listen, but making them feel like they are going to be heard, which is what the secretary wants. And we're going to provide in this lawsuit a vehicle for people to be heard.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to come to Ken to you first to ask you this question. For those in the audience who might not be familiar, could you explain the circumstances that led to the loss of your license?
So in 2015, a law was passed in California called SB 277. And the purpose of that law was to eliminate the philosophical, they don't have a religious exemption in California. It was called philosophical exemption. But the quid pro quo was that the medical exemption would be allowed to be expanded beyond ASIP. And all kinds of things could be considered: family history, history in distant relatives, genetics, and so people came to me asking for these medical exemptions. And what I did was I screened them for their family history. If there was something in the child's personal history or family history that would potentially qualify them for a medical exemption. And I did a genetic screen because genetics was so much a big part of this, getting this bill passed. And I found 12 genes that had been associated in the medical literature with increased adverse event risk following immunizations. And so I screened children for these genes. And if they had mutations on these genes, I would tell the parents, well, this is consistent with the personal or family history. And while I can't give you a quantitative risk assessment, I can give you a qualitative risk assessment that there are a lot of mutations on these genes and we could be in a high risk situation. I had my medical license taken away for giving a medical exemption to a 4-month-old in congestive heart failure. And I literally said, shame on anyone who would give a vaccine to a 4-month-old in congestive heart failure. But it didn't matter what I said because the magistrate or ALJ, whatever you want to call them, had already written her opinion before the hearing. That was pretty clear on reading it. And I just have one other thing to add. In 2004, I was invited to testify at the Congressional Reform and Oversight Committee that Dan Burton of Indiana was hosting. And it was about new developments in treating autism. And what I was hoping was to get legislation passed on a federal level that would allow kids on the spectrum to be able to use their third-party payers, because almost everything involved in treating kids on the spectrum was off-label. And I was pulled aside by his senior health aide, and I was told this, quote unquote, everyone in the upper echelons of government who wants to know whether vaccines are causing autism already knows, and they're not going to do anything about it. And things like reparations came up and pharmaceutical pressure. So the point is, people in the government already knew this. All this other stuff has just been prevarication and obfuscation to cover their tracks, because this is really infanticide. There's no other way to put it. So we're talking about, oh, we need this and we need. They already know. They've always known. And even in the documentary Vaxxed, where Congressman Dave Weldon literally came out and said, I was told they were going to kill me or kill my family if I didn't, get off this subject. So this is, we're dealing with some seriously nasty, corrupt people. And if COVID brought anything positive, it is the fact that I knew it would eventually destroy the vaccine program, and we are headed in that direction.
Paul, I think you've already alluded to the story about your emergency withdrawal of your license, but um, as you are a very brave person, why do you think it's so important to lead this fight, knowing that there's some risks to you again personally after all you've already suffered?
Ah, I'm free now. So after what I went through, I turned in my license and I said, you can have it if you drop all your charges. They dropped all the charges, which were all bogus anyway. But nevertheless, that left me free to now speak honestly and openly. I have no conflicts of interest. I wanted to point out something. Ken, what you did with finding the genetic vulnerabilities that people had, Liz, you know this because we were just at MAPS, Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, the whole conference was on genetics. And I remember in the wrap-up session on vaccines, I think we've identified, not me, I wasn't involved, but I was learning about it, close to 700 different genetic risk factors for either mitochondrial dysfunction or immune or neurological problems that are all tied in with this chronic epidemic of neurological disease, autoimmune disease, you name it. So we now know the genetic vulnerabilities, but that just sets you up. You can be vulnerable for cancer, but if you never smoke, you may never get cancer. Well, you can be vulnerable, and it turns out every one of us, all our children are vulnerable. Some are just more vulnerable than others. When you add vaccines, especially at the sheer number and how quickly it's done, how young they are when they get them, it's totally overwhelming their ability to detox, their ability for their immune system to develop normally, and the blood-brain barrier is wide open. And so, boom, you got all this neurotoxicity. And we now know the mechanisms by which it's happening. So the explosion of data that we've had in the last, I'd say, about 10 years since I wrote the vaccine-friendly plan, we have numerous studies. The CDC hasn't done this, but other people have, from Mawson's study originally to his latest 2025 study, my own study that came out in 2020, Hooker and Miller's studies. There are several that are now making it crystal clear that the unvaxxed are incredibly healthy and at much lower risk for all these chronic diseases, as well as infections, by the way. So whether you're talking neurodevelopmental, autism, ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, kind of the list that Rick listed in the beginning, we are seeing this primarily in the vaccinated and rarely in the unvaxxed. It's not never, but it's rarely. It's time now for the CDC to completely acknowledge the fact that they've been pushing a schedule that has never been tested, and it needs to just simply move to Schedule B, if not eliminate it altogether, frankly. But at the very least, we can't have mandates for a schedule that's never been tested. And that's why it's so important. We have more information now. And thankfully, RFK Jr. is talking about the CDC and actually all of his departments working on this issue and really looking into it. And I think there's a lot of important data that's coming out very soon that will make it crystal clear. The time for vaccinating the way we've been doing is over. As Ken said, thank you, COVID. I'm so sorry for all who've struggled with the loss of a loved one or had medical harm from COVID. At least, hopefully, we all wake up and we put an end to the absolute disaster that is the childhood vaccine schedule.
So this lawsuit actually calls America's vaccine program a public health outrage hiding in plain sight, in that we give more vaccines than any other country, yet we have the sickest kids in the developed world, and we're actually like number 37, where we act as if we're number one. Do you think that parents understand that, or that the general public understands that, Rick?
No, I think they've been lied to. And
Yeah.
what's interesting is in the CHD podcast earlier today, they played another Kennedy clip, the one in answer to Senator Cantwell, showing how vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives and all. And of course, what he ended up doing is he showed the fact that 90 to 95% of the decrease in the death rate occurred before any of these vaccines were actually came into market. So it's clearly not the vaccines that was responsible. I think he estimated, there's a study that estimates that 3.5% of the deaths that have been prevented was because of the vaccine, but the other 96.5% was for other reasons. And what I think that shows, that plus the basic fact of our lawsuit, which is that they've never been tested, I think that what that shows, I hate to say I'm a litigator. I mean, it seems to me there's been a massive fraud perpetrated on the American people for the last 30 or 40 years. You have this association between vaccine manufacturers and shills, talking heads like the American Academy of Pediatrics and some of the other places that are just gaslighting the country, everyone in the country, about the benefits of vaccines and hiding the fact that they've never been tested, let alone the fact that, as Kennedy now points out, and he's been pointing out since before he took office, the safety systems, theirs and the VSD, I mean, they don't work. They don't work. They don't analyze the data. They don't give a true picture. So when you take all these elements together, the conclusion is that really most people have been hoodwinked, some combination of hoodwinked and brainwashed in a way that just hid what's really in plain sight. I mean, when you have these kids that have these horrendous reactions and the adverse events and serious adverse events, and when you have escalations in autism and all these immunological conditions, I mean, it's kind of obvious unless you have some scheme. I mean, it's like 1984. So at some point, somebody's going to do something about it. But I think all of this data is starting to show that there's been this fraud, and COVID I think is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I think that is transforming people's perceptions. They've lost faith in the CDC. And unfortunately, I think I and a lot of people who actually know what they're talking about have this view that because of turbo cancers, because of all-cause mortality death rate, because of the fact that that the spike protein doesn't clear the way they had hoped it would, there's going to be downstream consequences, not just people, 20-year-olds, athletes dropping dead, but long-term consequences. And I think it's going to be, I think the COVID thing is going to be 100 times worse than thalidomide, right? And I think it's going to be national. And I think that is going to spark people to really start looking at this on a deeper level in terms of the whole vaccine program. Because I know what's happening is the government is now looking at the COVID shot, and it's going to give a fair evaluation, because what they do is they just throw these numbers. The COVID shot saved 4 million people. The vaccines for children saved 200 billion people. And they just make up these numbers. And you know, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled. So, and I think we are at the beginning of that process between the confluence of COVID, Kennedy being in there, and maybe a small part, you know, this lawsuit. That and part of these lawsuits I file anyway there's a PR component in them, and it's to educate people. I mean, I deal in this world. I live in this world. I believe in this stuff, but I live in a very liberal town in a very liberal state, and I deal with normal people that are boosted up the wazoo, that give their that thank the Lord that there's the 7th booster, COVID booster, and they take it. That's the world I live in. And I've yet to find any one of those people that knew, number one, that the vaccine schedule for children was never been tested, let alone, number two, that the Institute of Medicine keeps on telling them to test it. And not only did they not know, I've literally been called a liar by a member of my family for saying that. And then they had to look it up at ChatGPT and saw that I was right. So it's just the depth of ignorance is just, it's shocking, you know, for someone who has a foot planted in both worlds. And I think that's going to change. And I think Kennedy's going to helping to do it. Your group is CHD, our lawsuit, and what Siri's doing. And I think we're at the beginning of this change of view of how we view the whole vaccination program. That's what I think is going to happen, and of course, that's what I hope.
Rick just mentioned Aaron Siri, and he has a spectacular book out called Vaccines Amen, in which he dissects these issues and talks about how vaccinology has operated more like a religion than a science. So I highly recommend that to everyone. I'm going to come back to Paul Thomas and Ken Stoller, both MDs, as doctors who've treated thousands of children. Can you talk a little bit about the patterns that you've seen that made you question vaccines? And this may be going back many years for both of you.
Well,
Paul,
can
you
I
can
start?
Yeah.
Okay, go.
Oh,
go ahead,
okay.
Paul.
All right, I'll start. So 2004, 5, 6, and 7, my own patients who I was responsible for saying we're going to do these vaccines, I was following the CDC schedule back then, regressed into severe nonverbal autism, having been completely normal with great eye contact, social, and developing language. That was my wake-up call, along with having learned from you, Liz, and many others who were educating us on what was really going on. But it wasn't just autism. It was an explosion of ADD, ADHD, learning problems, developmental delays, and infections. I mean, kids are just sick. Acute infections, chronic infections, all the asthma, allergies, eczema. It's an explosion. I mean, we just heard recently RFK Jr. with a recent stat. I think it was 76% of kids by the end of high school will have a chronic condition. I mean, this is outrageous. It is hard. When I hold a baby and I look in their eyes, if they're not going to be vaccinated, I am so happy for them because the lights stay on. And when kids get vaccinated, I vaccinated my own kids, the lights went out. It's this, I call it vaccine eyes. There's this blank stare. Nobody's home. It's tragic what we're doing. And we have the data now. I've published it in my 2025 VaxFacts book. All the data that I was talking about earlier is published. Do you know, if you're watching this and you hear this and you're going to go, what? Go read it. The data's all there. The references are there. For every single vaccine on the childhood schedule, you are more likely to die from the vaccine than you are from the disease for which you're vaccinating. Let that sink in. Who wants to choose higher death rate for their own child by something they're doing? Obviously, a loss of a child, whether it be from a disease for which we have a vaccine or whether it be from the vaccine itself, is horrible. But you are more likely to die if you vaccinated. That's just death. You can look at the SIDS numbers, sudden infant death syndrome, one of the highest rates in the United States. Why is our infant mortality worse than most of the other developed countries? It's because I believe SIDS deaths almost all happen. 78% of them happen in the first week after vaccines. It's cause and effect. You vaccinate, you lose your child to SIDS. Talk to NICU nurses, and they will all tell you, when they vaccinate those kids, they stop breathing. A large percentage of them, but they're on monitors in the NICU, so they resuscitate them. The kids they don't die at that point. If that baby was home, that's a SIDS, that's a death. So the numbers of SIDS far exceed. I mean, it's almost 10 times more deaths, just SIDS alone, than all the deaths from the diseases for which we have vaccines. You just cannot make any sense of this. So, yeah, I digress. Sorry about that, Liz.
No worries. Ken.
So that's why I use the word infanticide, because that's what it is. Let's go back 35 years. And the hepatitis B vaccine was coming out, and I thought I was obligated to obtain informed consent from the parents. I didn't realize the 1986 Vaccine Act pretty much removed that responsibility from me. So I was trying to do some research to find out what the justification was of giving hepatitis B vaccine to every single 2-hour-old infant, especially when there were only about 200 women a year in the United States who delivered with chronic active hepatitis B. And after about 3 months, and I was feeling really worthless because I thought I was a good researcher. I couldn't find anything. And then the light bulb went off. Well, maybe I can't find anything because there's nothing to find, that they didn't do the research. They didn't test this on infants. And the truth is they didn't. Yeah, and their safety test was 4.5 days long. And I realized that the hepatitis B vaccine was a scam, essentially. And if that was a scam, were the other vaccines a scam? So one by one, I started researching every single vaccine and realized that they were all scams. And so that's how I got into this. And I will say at the same time, 1990, the first autistic child I had ever seen in my entire life, had never seen one in medical school, had never seen one in residency, came into my office, and I was praying he wasn't there for autism because I didn't know how to treat autism. And my nurse said he was there for worms. I said, oh, I can do worms. So I wrote a prescription for mebendazole, and it was called Vermox back then. And I got a call from the mom that afternoon, and she said, what did you give my kid? And I'm going, oh my God, what happened? He's making better eye contact. He's more verbal, and he's calmer. And I had to admit, I didn't know how this drug worked. So I called up the pharmaceutical company that made it. And they said it blocks molecules of a certain molecular weight from crossing cellular membranes. So in the case of the worm, they die of starvation because the sugar doesn't pass into their bodies. And I said, well, does it also block molecules of a certain molecular weight from crossing the cells of the intestinal villi so that they don't get in the bloodstream? And she said, yes. And so I went, so what are we looking at? What molecule is this blocking? And I'm afraid it took me several years to figure out that mebendazole was blocking gluten absorption. And I went, well, there goes my Nobel Prize, because if gluten was the problem, you stop eating gluten. You don't take a drug to block its absorption. But so it was back in 1990 that I realized, wait, this is not a psychiatric diagnosis. This is a medical problem, and there are potential solutions. Unfortunately, back in 1990, there wasn't really anyone to tell this to. But that's how it started for me.
Thank you, Ken. And that's the reason that the Medical Academy for Pediatrics and Special Needs really wants to go global, to get that message that these kids do have medical problems, that you treat the medical problems, and a lot of times their developmental problems get better. So, with Secretary Kennedy leading HHS and a new inquiry on the safety of vaccines, with a new advisory committee in place, which is ACIP, which is the American Committee for Immunization Practices. How is that changing the dynamic between the CDC and other medical associations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and ACOG, which is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists? Paul, do you want to take the first shot at that one?
Well, I'm just smiling because Ken and I took different approaches to the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics. If you're a pediatrician, that's your group, right? I mean, these are the supposed to be the best of the best pediatricians, and they've just been bought and sold, and pharma owns them. But what happened was, so when the CDC came out after ACIP met and they removed COVID from the recommended schedule to basically the Schedule B for shared decision making from 6 months all the way through childhood and for pregnancy. So basically, COVID is no longer a recommended vaccine. The AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I think ACOG's done the same, but I'm not 100% sure. One of you can probably clarify on that. But the AAP put out a policy statement that in all 50 states, all vaccines, and they're basically including the COVID, should be mandatory, no exemptions whatsoever, except medical, which we all know medical doesn't exist because of what happened to Ken Stoller, happened to so many other physicians. You write medical exemptions, you're probably going to lose your license. So they have pulled out. I mean, so my whole career, I remember when I was in medical school, which was back in the early 80s, the AAP was in charge of making vaccine recommendations, and they kind of went into some room, I guess, with the CDC, and they came up with the schedule. But the AAP was very involved. Now, because of what has happened with a very science-based committee, ACIP now has real scientists who are looking at all aspects. They've changed the recommendation, so AAP has pulled out. They're no longer participating with the CDC. And that just speaks to their massive conflicts of interest. I mean, anybody that's I wish every pediatrician would just abandon the AAP because they are destroying pediatrics, absolutely destroying it. And I think pediatrics is going to be history if people don't wake up.
So I resigned.
Ken, comment?
I resigned from the AAP in 2008, and I wrote my resignation letter was entitled "Les Incompetents." Rick, did you read it yet?
One of these days. I'm a little busy.
You asked for it. I gave it to you. Read it.
I did. Yeah.
So, and you know, I wanted to resign much earlier than that, but Mark Blacksell kept telling me, hang in there, hang in there. I couldn't hang in there anymore. I couldn't take their duplicity. And I was fed up. So, you know, I resigned from this organization in 2008, like I said, and I think they need to be held accountable for what they've done. They're not looking after the best interests of children. They're looking after the best interests of themselves. And, you know, as far as ACOG goes, they had the most detailed, comprehensive recommendations on not giving vaccines to pregnant women. And suddenly all this money comes into their organization. And boy, they wanted all pregnant women vaccinated with this experimental gene therapy. So it was quite obvious, you know, what happened. So the corruption runs very deep, and all these organizations need to be held accountable as far as I'm concerned.
So we know that Dr. Paul and Dr. Ken do not mince their words. When all these health agencies are in conflict, where does that leave parents to get good information? At the IMA, we're trying to put out things like the Smart Moms Ask guides, and I've done some work with childhood guides on immunizations, which I really developed for people that, for whatever reason, wanted to or had to get them. The ability to decline them is always an option. So, what do you guys think? Where can people go? They don't know who to trust. They don't want to trust the CDC or the AAP. Is there a void that we can fill?
I would say
Paul.
absolutely. Do not trust the AAP. They're not trustworthy. The CDC wasn't trustworthy, and I'm still waiting to see if they're going to actually take the actions they need to take. They're on the right track. We're starting to head in the right track. Children's Health Defense, full disclosure, I have a show with CHD TV called Pediatric Perspectives, but there are lots of great shows. I know, Liz, you've been on these shows. Their online journal called The Defender. It's searchable. It's a great resource. And then there's some great books out there. I mean, you mentioned Aaron's series, my own book, Vax Facts. There's Vaxxed Unvaxxed that Brian Hooker was involved with RFK Jr. and several other great books, because unfortunately the literature, it has been very difficult to publish for the last 15, 20 years if you were publishing anything that was showing vaccines in a negative light. Basically, you couldn't get it published. And when you did, as I did with my study, it ends up getting retracted for bogus reasons. So massive censorship. I'm delighted that you guys are trying YouTube. I've been banned off of YouTube for about 10 years. And if you're successful, I may try it again. But I have 1.6 million subscribers, and I had to scrub my YouTube channel of all vaccine information due to the censorship, or they were just going to take down the whole channel.
And one of the viewers just mentioned Turtles All the Way Down, which is another fantastic book. Ken, your comments.
Yeah, one of the things I was told back 20 years ago was that we would never see the words autism and treatment in the same federal legislation, because it would become very obvious very quickly that we weren't treating autism, we were treating vaccine injury. And I was told that would never be allowed.
So let's fantasize for a moment. If this lawsuit is successful, what would change? How could it help protect both the doctor's ability to practice medicine and the parent's right to make informed choices? Rick, let's start with your comment.
Well, let me just back up a little bit and remind everyone something, or maybe they don't know this, but at the end of April, I filed this lawsuit, Cardenas versus Monaris, which is by a pediatrician, the goal of which was to have the CDC remove the recommended status of the COVID shot for kids because it had never been proven to have a clinical benefit and the pandemic is over. We filed that at the end of April. The other thing we asked is that the CDC stop forcing pediatricians to order and administer the COVID shot for kids because for the same reason. So, and we asked that the CDC do that before the end of June ACIP meeting. So that was the end of April. The end of May, RFK Jr. announced just that he was doing that plus added pregnant women. So, that's what prompted me the idea of filing the Thomas case. So we have some track record. Maybe it was just a coincidence that we file and 30 days later, we asked him to do it in 60 days, 30 days later, he does exactly that. I've worked with RFK Jr. in a number of cases. I've represented him in some cases, and he's been co-counsel to me in all of my COVID misinformation cases. And we're before the Supreme Court in one case right now. So I think I have a sense, I don't talk to the guy anymore, but I have a sense of what he thinks. And I know he agrees. I have to believe he agrees with the specific request in the Thomas case. Whether he can do it or not, I don't know. I think they're going to have to answer a very hard question, which is it an important fact that they've never safety tested the combined schedule? If they're going to say that it's not important, let them take that position. So I think somewhere sooner than ACIP would decide, they're going to have to deal with this issue. And it wouldn't shock me if that happened in the next 6 months. As to what happens then, well, if that were to happen, that will greatly expand the schism now between CDC and HHS and the AAP and those organizations. As you know, AAP has now tried to reinstate the COVID shot for kids. They filed a federal lawsuit about that. They've dissociated themselves with a lot of what CDC is doing. The Eastern region has now formed a coalition to their own mini ACIP, right? So we see a schism. So the short-term effect is that schism will dramatically increase if they do that. Now, what happens then? That's interesting. There are two things that the entire vaccine community want. Number one, they want to make vaccines shared decision-making or non-mandatory. And that is the express purpose of this lawsuit. The other thing they want, which is the crown jewels, and Kennedy talks about it all the time, is they want to end the immunity that the manufacturers and the jabbers have for the shots, for giving the shots. So what's interesting is a couple of weeks ago, Kennedy gets on TV and, it just sometimes you plug into the universe and prayers get answered. He literally stands up and says a couple of weeks ago, of course, the states don't have to follow the CDC mandate because mandates are a matter of state law. But he says, I got to tell you, if they do that and if they cause injury, the vaccine manufacturers and the jabbers are not going to be protected by immunity. Now, maybe there's an interim step in terms of the VIC program, Vaccine Injury Protection Program. But I think what Kennedy is announcing is that if they go that route and not stick to and recommend vaccines that are shared decision making, then they're going to lose their federal immunity. And I have a feeling that me and 10,000 other lawyers around the country are going to start suing the manufacturers and the jabbers for any injury that comes down. And I think, and we'll see what the courts do, but I think that's his threat. So that is certainly a conceivable outcome if they do it. The chasm, the schism gets bigger. Kennedy goes through with this threat. They change what's covered in terms of the vaccine injury program, and all of a sudden, we have the second part of really what our community has been asking for 30 years, which is the removal of immunity. So all kinds of interesting things could happen. It's certainly going to end up in court, but all this time, more and more information is going to come out about the harm. And my view is, and this is, Kennedy says this all the time, sunshine. You have sunshine, you put light on a problem and let the chips fall where we may. Ultimately, we're right. We have the science on our side. They just have scare tactics. And that's, I think, going to be part of what's going to change.
And Ken, the last comment to the question if the lawsuit is successful, and then we'll go to Autumn, who's been collecting questions from the audience.
Okay. I just want parents who are listening to understand that most pediatricians, sadly, are not on board. So this shared decision making, even if it's successful, so if the lawsuit's successful, you go to your regular pediatrician, which most people do, they are going to still push the vaccines as safe and effective. They have not opened their eyes to what's going on. It's like they've got their head in the sand. And if you are going to take your advice from somebody who knows very little about vaccine, not only they don't know what's in the vaccines, but they certainly aren't aware of the harms that are being caused by vaccines, you still might be putting your children at risk. So it is as imperative as ever that we get the information out to parents so that as they're making those shared decisions with their physician, actually what you ought to be doing is calling ahead of time once you know, hey, I don't want to do these vaccines. This is danger. Like Ken was saying earlier, it's infanticide. You're going to kill your kid. Why? So you call your pediatrician, say, how do you handle families that want to pause or wait on vaccines or don't want to do vaccines? And if they say, oh, you're not welcome here, next, until you either find somebody who will honor your belief system and support you in how you want to raise your kids, or skip pediatricians altogether. Find a healthcare provider. They're online. They're in other specialties who will back you up so that you can actually be the parent and determine the destiny of your children. It is incredible how healthy kids are who are unvaccinated, who are eating organic, healthy food, who are getting exercise, who are not on their screens all the time, who have a healthy community around them. You wouldn't believe it. You do not need the mainstream approach, sick care, if you will. So yes, we still have our job ahead of us to educate. And thank you, Liz, for what you're doing, and IMA for what you're doing. This is amazing.
Ken.
Present company excluded. Pediatricians are the dumbest doctors on the planet, and it is just best to stay away from them. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ken. And I guess maybe I need to make a little disclaimer that the opinions expressed by the people on this panel are not official representations of the Independent Medical Alliance. Amber, you are up with our questions.
Hello. So since we are already at the 5 o'clock mark, I'll just try to go through these as quickly as possible. LNO asked, when there is a shift to shared decision making, how is this really a change when the doctors get information from the captured medical groups and journals and are likely to recommend vaccines?
Yeah, I basically answered that. You're not getting good information, so you have to think for yourself. I forgot to put one other really important fact, and this is just my own opinion. This is not IMA's opinion, but they're talking about maybe getting aluminum out of the vaccines. That's a very good idea, by the way. However, if they pivot to mRNA technology, which it looks like that's the direction they're going, that's even worse. Do not accept any mRNA product, period. It is dangerous. It has never been proven to be safe, and it should be a flat out no. The COVID jabs were primarily and mostly mRNA, both the Moderna and Pfizer products.
Good point.
Laura Chamberlain asked, how do the laws allowing federal agencies such as HHS, CDC, FDA interact with the states who are forming their own CDCs and other competing agencies? Do any of you have thoughts on that question?
Well, I guess that's like a legal thing. So,
Go for it.
well, it's very, very complicated. I can tell you a couple basic principles. Mandate laws are a matter of state law under just the Constitution. So the federal government doesn't mandate any vaccines. They recommend them or shared decision making, but it's the states that actually do the mandates. Up until now, many states have followed the CDC's recommended guidelines, and most states follow the contraindications and precautions schedule issued by the CDC. However, as you pediatricians know, the AAP publishes its own, in effect, schedule in the Red Book. So they have a competing, which is largely overlapping to the CDC. And I think what's going to happen is California has already enacted a new law as of last week saying that they're only going to listen to the CDC as of January 1st, 2025.
The
So-
AAP, you mean?
AAP, right? Right.
Yep.
So they're only going to be listening to the CDC until January 25, and then they're going to use AAP and a couple other sources. So California's already taken that route. As I said, some of the states in the Northeast are also taking that. I have a feeling that I have a strong feeling that that kind of effort is going to be challenged in court for some of the same reasons in the Thomas case. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be involved in that. So it's an ongoing issue. There's going to be a lot of litigation subsequent to that. And of course, then you have the whole issue of whether they're going to have immunity from lawsuits. And that's going to be big. And I think there are going to be some, I think there's going to be a whole cottage industry of lawyers that are going to start suing vaccine companies and administrators, people who administrate the vaccine. So it is complicated. It's an indirect relationship, and that's part of the schism that I think is going to happen as the CDC and ACIP becomes more, from our perspective, more science oriented and less dogma religion oriented. I think that is what's going to happen.
A question for for all of our doctors here. We got a question on a new therapy that is folinic acid for autism. Are any of you guys familiar with this new therapy, or can speak to it for our audience?
So
I'd like to say,
oh,
I was
go
going
ahead,
to say
Liz.
it's not all that new. We've been looking at this issue for a couple of decades, and the specific studies on leucovorin have a very good published track record since about 2015. So the basic idea is that as many as 60 to 80% of children with autism have evidence of folate receptor autoantibodies, meaning that their body is attacking the folate receptors and interfering with the ability to get folate into the brain, leading to cerebral folate deficiency. Folate is a B vitamin, crucial for neurologic function. And by giving the leucovorin, you essentially are addressing that issue. Ken, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I wanted to say that these autoantibodies to various neuroreceptors, it's not limited to just folate receptors. That's the one we know about, that's the one we discuss, and that's the one we treat. But I can guarantee you the oxytocin receptors are impacted as well. And just like in fetal alcohol syndrome, these kids need oxytocin replacement. And it'll make their lives so much more pleasant if they can be on oxytocin. There's nothing worse than having little to no oxytocin. It ruins people's lives. It ruins people's relationships. And we're just not at the place where we're thinking about these things yet. But it's not just autoantibodies to folate receptors. Other receptors are involved.
Right. So I don't want people to think that leucovorin, which is LEUCOVORIN for the person that asked in the chat, I don't want you to think that that's the cure for every person with autism. It is a treatment, but we know that there are many paths to becoming a person with autism who has all the various symptoms, and we're trying to address those. And oxytocin, for those who may not know, is your bonding hormone. It's what makes mothers get up in the middle of the night to nurse their babies, and it's what helps people recognize facial expressions in their friends and playmates. So you're absolutely right, Ken. Autumn?
Some of our members in the audience are wondering how they can help support this lawsuit.
Oh, thank you for asking. So the only bad news in this whole thing is originally this was going to be CHD. The CHD was going to be the plaintiff and the funder. But sadly, at the end of right before I filed the complaint, I realized this for some technical reasons that they could do neither. So this has been largely we're doing a what's it called? Go. Yeah, shared decision-making thing. So, this is a lawsuit that had to be funded. Ken was put out of business. Paul was put out of business. My deal with them is they are responsible for zero, nothing. I mean, they've already been worked through it. So right now I'm funding the kids. At some point, we'll raise some money maybe, but this has to be filed. This is a matter of public interest. It's a case that I think is going to change the way people think about vaccines, because the majority of people, as I said, do not know these two facts. So, it's like build it and they will come. So we'll see what happens. So sure, anybody wants to contribute, go to the website, contribute, and things will work out. I'm at this point, I'm getting up in years. I'm worried more about my legacy, than the next vacation. So anyway, so anybody wants to contribute, but the case is going to go forward one way or the other.
Well, do you guys have any closing thoughts for our audience before we move on to our closing announcements? Maybe any words of wisdom for young families or young mothers uncertain of how to handle this issue of vaccines?
I just want to make the point that I want to empower mothers to listen to their instincts. Through millennia, women, particularly, although I don't want to exclude the fathers, but there are these instincts in place where you just have a gut feeling. I encourage you to, number one, trust that, and don't get your health care from anybody that bullies you into doing something that you don't feel good about. Coercion really should not be part of the practice of medicine, in my opinion.
My thought was
Paul,
just
again?
you need to remain hopeful and excited for your child. And it starts with being informed yourself to the point where what you're doing is exactly right. That's pivoting on what Liz said. You've got that inner knowingness, that intuition. Follow it. Don't let anybody tell you what to do for your own kids. Get the information and then stand firm on what you know. Yes, don't let anybody bully you. There's plenty of hope. The world seems to be going crazy, but there's plenty of hope. You do the right things and your kids will be okay. And if they're already harmed, there's plenty to do. Check out MAPS, Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. Those experts are amazing. And progress is always possible for your child.
And I do have a chapter in my book on the vaccines, the religion of jabism. So all we can do right now is just bring everyone's awareness to what's actually happening. Nothing will remain hidden. And we just have to follow the divine plan, and things will work out eventually.
Rick, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, not so much as a lawyer, but I would say, and I'm dealing with this issue because I have a couple grandchildren now. I think the most important thing that the takeaway from this whole debate, regardless of what side you're on, I think people have to think for themselves. I wouldn't trust 100% anything. I've represented maverick doctors for the last 40 plus years. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. I think you have to make your own decision. And these are among the most important decisions you have to make in life. In 5 states, you don't have that right in the states that don't have religious exemptions. So I have to say, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have to live in these states. But I know vaccine lawyers that moved out of California because they can't do it. I would say if you're hesitant, you've got to trust your instincts, do your own research. Think about your kids. Think about what's important. Some of these things are going to be easy. Hep B at day 1, that's ridiculous. I mean, even people are questioning vitamin K. There are reasons not to do vitamin K on day 1. But one thing it looks to me is just a layman. When these people in these pediatrician offices tell people, oh, let's give 3 or 4 vaccines, 3 or 4 different shots the same day, that it just, as a layman, just understand what you're doing with vaccines is you're tricking the immune system into thinking that it has seen an adjuvant that it hasn't really seen. And the way they do that now is through killed or attenuated vaccines. And they have to put all this stuff in to gin up the reaction. It seems to me just the epitome of hubris to think you can trick the immune system for year after year after year, 72 times, and not have downstream repercussions. I mean, people have been around, or the planet's been around for billions of years. And when you do things without realizing the consequences, bad things can happen. So I would have everyone keep that in mind and just do as much research as you can to figure it out and live in some place where at least you have the option.
I just want to do a little vocabulary lesson. Rick used a couple words. The adjuvant is what's added to the vaccine to make the child react to it. And then the antigen is whatever protein or toxoid that the child is trying to react to. So, Autumn, what is next?
Thank you for that. And thank you all so much for joining us. Dr. Mumper, I think we will just have you highlight some of the work. Livia will throw a slide up that you've been doing for IMA, and we will get on with our closing announcements. But thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Mine too.
So I love working with IMA. We have several programs. I did do a guide to childhood vaccination decisions, but I really want to clarify that the modified schedule, as Paul would say, of his vaccine-friendly schedule, we're realizing isn't friendly enough. And so the modified schedule there is promoted by me as like the absolute most you would ever do in circumstances where you had to conform. We are obviously arguing that you should have freedom of choice and shared decision making. I've been a little lax on doing new kids corners lately, but I'm going to get my act together and do some more. I've been a nanny to my own granddaughter, which has been awesome, but look for more of those. And then we have a series called Smart Moms Ask, which basically is just trying to empower mothers and fathers to ask questions of their providers and not be intimidated. So those are some of the things that we have going on.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Mumper, and for hosting tonight.
Oh, I love to do it. Thank you.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed tonight's show and you want to support the incredible work of these doctors, please consider purchasing one of their books. All titles are available through most major booksellers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You have Kids and COVID. Dr. Mumper reminded me that that book is available, not everywhere, but it is available at Barnes & Noble online and Amazon. We also have Dr. Paul Thomas's book, Vax Facts, and Dr. Stoller's book, Incurable Us. So we recommend that you guys check out all of those books and support these incredible doctors. Co-founder and Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Joseph Verone, and our senior researcher, Matt Halma, they published a peer-reviewed study showing natural treatments like ashwagandha and CBD and saffron may help ease anxiety. To learn more, you can scan the QR code on screen or search Feeling Anxious on our website. which is imahealth.org. Next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, IMA's weekly show will be hosted by Dr. Clayton Baker, and he will be joined by Jeffrey Tucker from Brownstone Institute and Stephanie Lucrecio from Children's Health Defense. Together, they will dive into a powerful discussion, the state of the movement, building a future of honest medicine. Don't miss this important conversation about where we've been and where we're headed. Our match campaign has been extended. We have reached $200,000. We are almost to our goal. Thanks to our generous donors. We've actually been given an extra 2 weeks, though, to meet our full goals, but we're not quite there yet. So there is still time to close the gap and double your impact. Every dollar you give helps fund these critical resources that we have here at the IMA. You can donate today on our website or by searching the link on screen. Before we wrap up tonight, I'd like to share a recent media interview featuring Senior Fellow Dr. Liz Mumper on the National Desk News, where she weighs in on the question, what's driving the exponential rise in autism? Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and let's take a look.
The Trump administration announced major progress in understanding the root causes of autism with studies that showed a possible increased risk linking the use of Tylenol in women who are pregnant. Joining us now to discuss is Dr. Elizabeth Mumper, Senior Fellow of Pediatric Education with the Independent Medical Alliance. Good morning to you, Dr. Mumper. Great to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
The Trump administration, said on Monday, pregnant women should stop taking acetaminophen, Tylenol, because of this research. What's your thoughts on this? What are the risks?
Well, I became aware of this problem about 2 decades ago. We had some data that showed that acetaminophen was associated with autism, and there are plausible reasons why this might happen. For example, children with autism have problems with certain detoxification pathways, the sulfation pathways, which are known to affect acetaminophen metabolism. Also, women in pregnancy are low on something called glutathione, which is very important for detoxification and as an antioxidant, and Tylenol reduces that also. And then there was also research that certain toxic metabolites of the Tylenol itself could actually affect the fetus in utero. So as a result of that, I have not been recommending acetaminophen since about 2003. The research is mixed. There are over 6,000 studies looking at it. Many say there's an association, some do not. I think it's very important to look at confounding factors and also to really look at what the plausible mechanisms might be. In my practice, my rate of autism was 1 in 297 at a time when the national rate was 1 in 50. So I think that's kind of a proof of concept that limiting Tylenol, which was one of the things that we did, could actually be as helpful. I don't want people to think acetaminophen is the only contributor or cause. Yes.
I was going to ask you about that because even just a cursory look online, there's one thing that many doctors, many scientists can all agree on, and that there is a genetic component, correct, that can make a child more prone to develop autism.
Yes. So despite the relatively small number of children with autism who have a classic chromosomal defect, there are a lot of genetic changes. We call these SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are small changes that might affect the inflammatory pathways or the immune pathways or the detoxification pathways. And we can now identify this with blood work to see which children might be at higher risk. The other thing that I was so glad to see during the hearings was that the administration talked about listening to the parents, because I've evaluated over 600 children with autism, and about 23% of the parents identified the MMR vaccine as a trigger to their child's regression. That doesn't mean that that's the only trigger. And I just think that we need to take this very seriously. And in the past, parents, when they brought up the issue that vaccines might be involved, were often gaslighted or told by their physicians that they were crazy or just overly anxious. So I think the administration signaled a change in this regard. We got a lot of information from parents back when I was medical director of the Autism Research Institute. They actually helped set our research agenda and gave us insights into therapies.
And there's also correlation and causation, as you know. So there's still a lot of research that still needs to be done. But tell us about, the recent hearings on the topic and the changes announced in the vaccine schedule. What did you think about that?
Sorry, you were frozen for a bit on my screen. Tell me about the recent...
The vaccine schedule. The vaccine,
yeah,
because you were just talking about that, because you still would recommend, obviously, MMR, correct?
Yes, but I always gave it at a later date because of some research that the CDC did, especially that showed that African American children seem to do worse in terms of risk of autism if it was given early. So I gave MMR after 3 years of age. I gave to African American children, I gave it at 2 years of age for Caucasian children. But there seems to be a shift from this one size fits all strategy of just following the schedule no matter what, to actually look at individual risks. And so the recent American Committee for Immunization Practices is moving away from the recommendation to give hepatitis B at birth, for example, and is suggesting maybe do it after a month, or maybe people are suggesting even later. So they're reconsidering these sort of standard recommendations to take into account parental choice, individual risk factors, and individual benefits to particular patients. And I think that's a move in the right direction.
Doctor, great talking to you this morning. And to learn more about this issue and some resources that can be made available to you, all you have to do is visit imahealth.org.